All right, great to see you today. Of course, the familiar face, Dr. Jonathan Javitt, who is the founder, director, and chairman of the board of this little company called NRx Pharmaceuticals. Great to see you. How are you, sir?
It's wonderful to see you.
You're starting to be sort of a member of the cast. You've been here so long.
Big time.
And now there's a Bizumentary coming out. Of course, we have a trademarked documentary called a Bizumentary, which is basically about Jonathan's space that the network wanted to do and give the opportunity to get some exposure for you guys, and we're going to be able to see that on Biz TV as well as the other networks here coming on very shortly. And you'll see it pretty in high rotation here for the next 9 months. But it's great to see you, and there's lots of stuff to talk about. And then we're going to spend a few segments talking to you, and of course you have a couple of guests we brought on. Of course, Mike Taylor, our investment banking expert, is going to be with us as well. And of course, coming up later in the program, Dr. David Feifel, and I'll let you explain who he is. But let's talk about ketamine. We've been talking about that ever since we met you. Ketamine being sort of aimed for the standard of care for suicidal ideation and a number of other things. My question for you is, if ketamine is going to be the standard of care, then why the heck hasn't the FDA approved it yet? Or why has anybody brought it up before?
Well, you know, it's a great question, and in fact, on next Thursday, the Reagan-Udall Foundation in Washington is hosting an all-day conference on exactly that question with the FDA, with the public stakeholders. But the short answer to the question...
Nobody asked nicely.
Nobody asked at all. Now, that's not exactly true. Johnson & Johnson did ask and did get approval for a nasal form of ketamine, and that's used in some patients, but most doctors want to be using the intravenous ketamine, and nobody's asked.
Real quickly, because you talked about this at the very beginning when we talked to you. Talk to us about the difference between the nasal, the oral, and the intravenous, as far as efficacy and safety and so on and so forth.
So as far as oral ketamine goes, nobody knows. It's the Wild West, and the Drug Enforcement Administration has shut down the guy who was mailing homemade oral ketamine around the country and telling patients to use it.
Probably a good idea that he said.
Probably a good idea. Probably drugs that are used in the United States should be proven to be safe and effective for their intended use and not to be abusable. So nasal ketamine and intravenous ketamine achieve similar things. They get ketamine into the bloodstream. Now, if you do it with a needle in an IV bag, you know exactly how much ketamine is going into the bloodstream, and you can achieve a steady state dose. If you administer ketamine through the nose, then you're giving a blast of ketamine, you're getting a sharp spike, and then you're getting a downdraft, so you have to keep giving nasal sprays up to 6 times an hour to maintain that steady dose. And the anatomy of the nose has a tremendous amount. You know, some people have these turbinates that stick into the middle of their airway that diverts the ketamine down the back of your throat into your stomach. So the pharmacology of nasal ketamine is much less regularized than the pharmacology of intravenous ketamine.
You talk about multiple doses in nasal ketamine. It brings up the question about how many doses at all. So when we talk about intravenous ketamine and as a treatment, is this something that would happen once a week? Is it once a month? Is it as needed?
Well, it's a great question. We know that the pharmacologic effect of ketamine wears off between 3 and 5 days. Now, does that mean that somebody's going to immediately have a recurrence of depression or recurrence of suicidality? That's a very individual thing.
And is there an endpoint, by the way, to treatment at that point, right?
And that, too, is a very individual thing. Bipolar depression, which is the form of depression that's most likely to be associated with suicide. You know, think Matthew Perry, Robin Williams, Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain. That's an episodic disease where, most people thought of Robin Williams as sort of a manic guy. They used to call it manic depression.
Right.
These are people who are the brightest light in the room. But when they get depressed, it's lethal. In fact, if you know 2 people with bipolar depression, you have one of those 2 people is probably going to try to kill themselves over the course of their lifetime. If you know 5 people with bipolar depression, one of them is going to succeed. Whereas what they call major depressive disorder or unipolar depression, you have people whose life goes between okay and pretty sad, and those people are actually much less likely to harm themselves.
No kidding. The name of the company, by the way, NRx Pharmaceuticals, they're publicly traded. NRXP is a stock symbol, NRXP. We've got Dr. Jonathan Javitt here. So talk about the intersection of NRXP and this question, if ketamine headed to be the standard of care.
Well, so
Have you talked about the FDA and where
as far as we know, we're the first people who are heading to the FDA with an intravenous form of ketamine that should be approvable. And in order to do that, we had to put together efficacy data proving that not only is there a difference between ketamine and placebo, which is what you have to do with most drugs, but as you just saw with the massive failure of ecstasy to get approved, MDMA to get approved, the FDA said, no, if you're going to try to get approval for a drug that can have a psychedelic effect, then you can't just test it against placebo, because people who don't get a psychedelic effect will know they didn't get the drug. You need to test it against a drug that gives people sort of a sham effect. So that they're not sure which drug they got. So one of the studies that we're presenting to FDA is one where ketamine's been compared to a drug called midazolam, which is commonly used in minor surgeries, in cataract surgery. It makes you feel funny, it can make you feel drowsy, but it's not an NMDA antagonist drug. It doesn't have the same pharmacologic effect as ketamine. And in that study also, ketamine had a potent anti-suicidal, anti-depressant effect, whereas midazolam didn't. And when they took the midazolam patients and said, now let's give you ketamine, they had the same ketamine effect as the people who got put on ketamine in the first place. And then the third study we're going to show FDA is one where ketamine was randomized against electroshock therapy. And technically it was non-inferior to electroshock therapy, but if you actually look at the numbers, it was better than electroshock therapy in treating depression.
And we've talked about that in past shows, and I think the Bizumentary is going to touch on that as well. So you've basically made ketamine a life-saving drug. The path forward needs to be, where can we get it? Clinics, correct? That's got to be path forward.
Well, the path forward is how do we put it in a bottle? Because not only do you have to be able to show the FDA that the drug works, you have to show that you know how to make it, you know how to make it the same way every time. Because the generic formulation of ketamine hasn't been reformulated since the Korean War. And one of the things that's in it that people don't recognize is a pretty toxic preservative. It's called benzanthonium chloride, which you can find on Wikipedia. Wikipedia will tell you this is a poison.
If Mike could spell it, we'd find it.
Yeah, yeah. Wikipedia will tell you this is a poison. You don't want it in your bottle.
Stay right there. We're going to keep you over. Plus, we got a couple extra guests coming up here to talk about the path forward in terms of clinics and everything else. Dr. Jonathan Javitt, Chairman of the Board, NRx Pharmaceuticals, stock symbol NRXP. You can go to nrxpharma.com. More Big Biz Show continues. Stand by. I'll tell you what, we have a confab. Look at this. Thank God the FCC doesn't allow you to actually drink on television. Don't forget, 125 million TV homes strong with Biz TV, American Life Network, as well as Bloomberg Financiero and Bloomberg EU to come. Big Biz Show, bigbizshow.com. Thanks for having us today. So, Dr. Jonathan Javitt is the founder, director, and chairman of the board of NRx Pharmaceuticals. We got a couple of folks. One familiar, of course, is Mike Taylor. Mike Taylor, our investment banking expert on the program, has been on for a number of years, on and off, and has been on lately because he is a big proponent of NRx Pharma, and of course, the soon-to-be spinoff of Hope Therapeutics. But let's talk about this unfamiliar face, soon to be very familiar, because you're in a 1-hour Bizumentary here on Biz TV.
Right.
That's going to be airing, I think, for about 9 months in heavy rotation, meaning a couple times a week. His name is Dr. Feifel, David Feifel. He is professor emeritus of psychology at UCSD. Let me tell you about UCSD.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Let me bring you back to a gentler time. The year was 1978. At the time, I was a 3-sport athlete with scholarships and a 4.0 grade point average. And the best school to go to was UCSD. I was weeded out the first semester. I swear to God.
Mr. Sullivan, you actually have to open the books.
No, it wasn't about that. It was about, back in the day.
It was about the dean's daughter, we heard.
No, that was the 7 other schools I went to. You remember, I don't know if anybody else at this table can remember this. You may remember film strips.
Of course.
Remember film strips in the studio?
Of course.
Or in the classroom? I was going to, as a pre-med at the 4th college, which is now called Warren's College. Okay? Yeah. We're the first class at Warren College. First of all, I went to a trigonometry class. Well, what the hell is this? And number two, they pull out the film strip in open heart surgery. I was out.
Okay.
I took a vocal music scholarship at USD the very next semester. That was. I think we're all happy that I'm not saving lives here today. Great to have you along today. I know that we've been arguing about who gets the first question, and going into this, if you're just joining us, we're talking about how NRx has basically created a ketamine life-saving drug, and the next step in this is got to be clinics, FDA, the whole 9 yards, which we're all here to talk about. But Mike, won the coin toss about the first question.
Well, Dr. Feifel, you opened up the first ketamine clinic in the United States. What is the secret sauce to that? I mean, how does that happen?
It happens out of desperation. Desperation for wanting better tools to treat your patients.
Sure.
I went into psychiatry because I felt that it was ripe for a golden era. At the time, when I was in medical school, neuroscience was just exploding, and we were getting all these new tools, be able to image the brain, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a golden era. This is the field to go. The brain is the ultimate organ. And then, so I really prepared for a kind of to be a career to really be on the forefront of that. I did a PhD in neuroscience, did my MD degree, went to UCSD, which is one of the top research places, and decade into my career, I was like, what's going on? I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I was still writing the same medication prescriptions that, my mentors in medical school were writing when they were just residents and things like that. So I thought, nothing's translating into new treatments. And I was thinking, I might just miss this revolution. It might be the residents I'm teaching who get it. And then some things really started to break in a good way. And one of those things was a couple of small studies that came out of, one out of Yale, and then another one out of NIMH, replicating it, that ketamine, which is a drug that everyone learns about in medical school as an dissociative anesthetic. Like, nobody associates it as a psychiatric drug, but some curious researchers at Yale who were seeing some interesting things with ketamine did a pilot study, and they showed that at lower doses, at sub-anesthetic doses, a 40-minute infusion was like a blockbuster. I mean, these people who had treatment-resistant depression didn't respond to anything. And most people in the field, including myself when I first read that, just wrote it off because it's just too good to be true. Because not only was it effective, it was effective, within a span of hours, which is in psychiatry. We don't brag about how fast our treatment. We're just happy when they work.
Yeah.
So I said this is not possible, and we see a lot of studies come out. It was a small number of people, and I think it never gets replicated. So I blew it off. 6 years later, it was replicated, and I said, I'm still skeptical, but I'm so desperate. What if it's half as good as these studies? So I went to UCSD, the powers that be, and said, I want to give my patients with depression ketamine.
When you talk about desperation, are you desperate because you're losing patients to suicide, or
You're seeing veteran numbers. You're seeing the same numbers we're seeing, or is it something different?
Look, you do lose people, but even when you don't lose people, you lose people.
Sure.
Because when somebody lives with depression, they may be alive, but
They're not really sometimes, right?
It's gone.
They're really not.
His name is Dr. David Feifel. He is the professor emeritus of psychiatry at University of California, San Diego. So the question is, clinic-wise, and it kind of goes into a two-part question for the two of you. And then, of course, there's investor will and investor accreditation when you talk about investors being interested in this, which is why I've got you all three here. Is this a nationwide type thing? Do you put these in every city? Do you make it a destination point as they have some cancer treatment centers across the country, or do you make this with every area of dominant influence in the United States, in which there's 16 of them, to where you don't have to go far to get? What's the ultimate goal for you?
I think the ultimate goal, yes, is everyone having access, and everyone being able to, without too much inconvenience, being able to go and get this remarkable treatment.
Mike, you and I have worked on a ton of deals together, because everybody knows in my other life, I'm an investment banker and run a venture fund and a couple of other hedge funds. And you and I when we first talked about this as something to take a look at, neither of us were, other than, looking at this company as a publicly traded company that had a long way to go, got emotionally involved in this thing. And suddenly we see this political will with investors that you talk to as you represent billions of dollars of family office money. What's been the tipping point when you're talking to people, and for you specifically, when we're talking about Hope Therapeutics, which I'll let Jonathan explain in just 1 second, but talk about that part of it.
Yeah, I think what we've started to see is that from a business standpoint, obviously, unfortunately, there's a very large market. And the ketamine clinics, I think, what we're trying to do with Hope Therapeutics is to really build out a viable place that's medically backed for people to go who are struggling, suicidal ideations or feelings of
And it doesn't
harming
exist now.
It doesn't exist.
And there's not a, not to mention there's not
Too
a
many
retail-
clinics are confused with med spas that do ketamine on Monday and vitamin B on Tuesday. And
That's a typical week for Mike, except for the ketamine.
Well,
A little massage on Wednesday.
It's donuts on Monday.
Okay,
and
there you
then-
go.
Yeah.
But I mean, the point is, if you take this nationwide under the banner of Hope Therapeutics, as we've talked about before, talk about what that looks like.
so, our objective is to think of DaVita. If you're a patient who needs dialysis, you know that you can walk into any DaVita clinic anywhere in the United States and get reliable care according to protocols that everybody understands with a quality that everybody understands. And right now, ketamine clinics are the Wild West. You've got some highly credible clinics that are led by psychiatrists, where not only are they treating people with the drug, but they've got a whole therapeutic environment built around it so that they know that these people who have real risk of self-harm are safe. And then you've got a bunch of people who heard about it, who are hanging out a sign, who may not have any real training in psychiatry at all, who are just slinging ketamine without FDA approval, without being under any kind of safety umbrella, and people are reading about some unfortunate happenings as a result. So the objective is to build a national brand that people can rely on, that the FDA can trust, that the regulators can trust, that the insurers can trust.
And the investors can trust as well, correct?
Yeah, because right now the alternative for people with suicidal depression is electroshock therapy.
Dr. Feifel, what's the connection point here? What's the last mile solution to get us there, in your opinion?
I think Jonathan pointed out a lot of the needs. That is to bring something that right now is very unregulated, non-standardized, to weed out some of the bad players, to get it to get the quality up, a little bit more standardized, and so that anyone can go to a place and know that this is going to be done the right way. Right now, that's not the case.
You two get the last word. Hope Therapeutics, as a name brand. What is the path to the finish line here for you in terms of time frame?
Well, for us, the path to the finish line is to put together the first tranche of clinics in key cities that'll, you're talking about a top-line revenue that should be $100 million by the end of 2025, where there's a footprint that has durability, and to build from that footprint to a nationwide rollout.
And Mike, I'm not talking about investors in the public markets. I'm talking about investors in the family office side, on the pipe markets, and putting money in on the side. Is there political will? Is there investor interest?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an opportunity for a family office or a private pool of money to get involved in a very worthy cause that is going to provide a rate of return. We see a very replicable model here that we can roll out nationwide. So,
Dr. Jonathan Javitt, Mike Taylor, Dr. David Feifel, you guys all come back together. We need a whole show like this. Forget him. In fact, I wouldn't even be here. Let's have you host the show. In fact, let's do that Monday. Next Monday.
So I don't have to eat that week. No worries.